Gather close. This happened on the night of October 3rd, 1998. Long before live streams, podcasts, and social media, millions of Americans stayed awake listening to one late-night radio show. It was the kind of program where strange stories lived, where callers spoke about UFOs, secret military projects, unexplained disappearances, and things that never appeared on the evening news. That Thursday night, veteran radio host Daniel Cross sat alone inside his small broadcasting studio outside Silver Wells, Arizona. The desert around him was silent. A single red light above the microphone signaled he was live. Every Thursday, he opened one special phone line. It wasn't advertised. It wasn't screened. Anyone claiming to work for a classified government project could call directly. Most callers sounded prepared. They spoke carefully, choosing every word. Some claimed to have worked inside hidden laboratories buried beneath military bases. Others described experimental aircraft or mysterious lights seen over restricted airspace. Daniel had heard it all, but nothing prepared him for the next call. The moment the line connected, he heard frantic breathing, not nervous, terrified. The man wasn't trying to sound convincing. He sounded like someone running for his life. "Please, don't hang up," the caller whispered between desperate breaths. Daniel leaned closer to the microphone. "Take your time. Tell us what's happening." "They found me." His voice cracked. "They know I'm talking to you." "Who found you?" There was a long pause. "The people I worked for." The caller explained that only days earlier he had been employed at a classified research facility hidden beneath an abandoned military installation in the Nevada desert. Officially, the base didn't exist. Unofficially, it studied things no government should possess. "I wasn't supposed to see what I saw," he whispered. Daniel asked whether he had left voluntarily. "No." Another pause. "They discharged me after an incident." "What kind of incident?" Silence. Then the caller spoke so quietly, Daniel almost couldn't hear him. "The visitors." Daniel frowned. "What visitors?" "They aren't aliens." The caller inhaled sharply. "Everyone keeps calling them extraterrestrials. They're wrong. They've never come from another planet. They've always been here." A chill settled over the studio. Millions of listeners leaned closer to their radios. They exist beside us. A different layer of reality. They cross over whenever they want. They made us believe they arrived from space because we'd never questioned something so far away. Daniel stayed calm. "What exactly are you saying?" "The government isn't studying them. They're following orders." Another shaky breath. "They've already infiltrated every major intelligence agency. They don't need to invade. They've been inside for decades." Daniel glanced toward the producer's window. Everyone inside the station had stopped moving. Nobody spoke. The caller continued. "They're preparing something." "What?" "I don't know the exact date, but major cities." He stopped. "They're moving resources away." "They know what's coming." Daniel asked the obvious question. "Coming from who?" The man answered immediately. "From them." The breathing became louder. "They told us it would look natural. They always make it look natural." Daniel noticed something strange. The audio quality began changing. A low electronic hum slowly appeared beneath the caller's voice. At first it sounded like static, then it became stronger. "What is that noise?" Daniel asked. The caller ignored the question. "They're tracking this call. They'll find me. You need to listen. They're not hiding underground because they're afraid of us. They're hiding because—" The sentence never finished. The line exploded with loud static. For less than a second, everything went silent. Then, every station carrying Daniel's broadcast disappeared simultaneously. Across hundreds of cities, radios suddenly fell quiet. No music, no commercials, no emergency backup, only silence. Something had interrupted the transmission, and nobody knew why. Story 2. The Forgotten Highway. Phone gather close. This happened during the summer of 1999, deep inside the barren landscape of Black Ridge Desert, New Mexico. Nearly 20 miles from the closest paved highway stood something that should never have existed. A single public telephone. No gas station. No buildings. No houses. Nothing but endless sand, scattered rocks, and miles of empty silence. The phone booth had originally been installed decades earlier for workers maintaining a remote weather monitoring station. The station closed long ago. Everyone left. But somehow, the phone remained connected. Its number still worked, and almost nobody knew it existed. Until a freelance photographer named Ethan Marshall stumbled across an old utility map while researching abandoned landmarks. Tiny black ink marked one forgotten symbol: a telephone. Curious, Ethan drove into the desert. After nearly an hour bouncing across rough dirt roads, he found it. A weathered glass booth standing completely alone beneath the blazing sun. To his surprise, the receiver still had a dial tone. Back home, Ethan began calling the number every evening, sometimes 20 times, sometimes 50. No answer, just endless ringing. Weeks passed. One afternoon, someone finally picked up. "Hello." The voice belonged to an elderly woman. She explained she lived in an isolated trailer nearly 5 miles away. Without a phone at home, she walked to the booth whenever she expected an important call. The conversation lasted only a few minutes, but Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. He built a small website describing the lonely telephone in the middle of nowhere. Then he posted the number. Everything changed. Within days, people from across the country started calling. Soon, people weren't satisfied with calling. They wanted to answer. Travelers began making pilgrimages into the desert. Some drove hundreds of miles just to spend a night beside a forgotten telephone. The booth never stayed quiet for long. Calls arrived from New York, London, Berlin, Tokyo, Sydney. Complete strangers talking to complete strangers. Some conversations lasted seconds, others continued for hours. There was something strangely comforting about speaking with someone who would never know your name. Visitors confessed secrets, broken marriages, lost children, financial disasters, regrets they had carried for decades. The booth became something unexpected, not a tourist attraction, a confession booth. One traveler later wrote, "It felt easier telling my darkest secret to a stranger standing in another country than to my own family." Soon newspapers discovered the story. Television crews arrived. Documentary filmmakers followed. The lonely telephone became famous. But fame brought something else. People started reporting experiences that couldn't be explained. Late one evening, a college student answered the ringing phone. He expected another curious tourist. Instead, he heard breathing. Slow, steady, no words, just breathing. He asked who was there. Nothing. Finally, a quiet voice whispered, "I know you're alone." The student laughed nervously. "Very funny." The voice answered immediately, "No, I really do." He spun around. The desert stretched endlessly beneath the stars. There were no headlights, no campsites, no movement, no sound except the wind. He slowly placed the receiver back onto the hook. 30 seconds later, the phone rang again. He answered. The same whisper returned. "You shouldn't have looked behind you." His heart stopped. He had never mentioned turning around. No one could have seen him. He dropped the receiver, ran to his truck, and drove away without looking back. He refused every interview afterward. He only repeated one sentence. It wasn't the voice that scared me. It was how it knew exactly what I had done. That wasn't the only report. Campers described answering calls filled with strange static that almost sounded like distant voices. Others heard children laughing. Some claimed they spoke with relatives who had died years earlier. A retired truck driver insisted someone called him by name, even though he had never introduced himself. No recording ever captured these conversations clearly. Only frightened eyewitness accounts remained. Still, people kept coming, because everyone secretly hoped the next call might answer questions nobody else could. When the broadcast finally returned nearly 4 minutes later, Daniel Cross looked nothing like the confident host millions of listeners knew. His normally calm voice was strained. "We've experienced what appears to be a complete satellite transmission failure," he said carefully. "Our engineers are investigating." Inside the control room, confusion had turned into panic. Every indicator showed the uplink had vanished without warning. The backup systems had activated exactly as designed, but they had nothing to reconnect to. It was as if the signal itself had simply disappeared. The network engineers searched for equipment failures. Nothing. No storm activity. No damaged hardware. No power outage. Every piece of equipment was functioning perfectly. Yet somehow, the transmission had been interrupted at the precise moment the frightened caller was about to reveal something important. Daniel tried calling the mysterious man back. The line no longer existed, not disconnected, not busy. It was as if the phone number had never been assigned. Within days, recordings of the broadcast began spreading across America. People copied the audio onto cassette tapes and mailed them to friends. Early internet forums filled with endless discussions. Everyone focused on the same question: who was the caller? Some believed he had been an intelligence officer. Others thought he was a military contractor suffering from psychological trauma. A few insisted he had simply been an actor performing the greatest radio prank ever attempted. Then, 3 weeks later, another call arrived. The man claimed he was the original caller. His explanation sounded simple. It was all fake. I wanted attention. I got carried away. I apologize. For some listeners, the mystery was over. But not for Daniel. Something felt wrong. The voice sounded similar, but not identical. The first caller struggled to breathe. His words broke apart as panic interrupted every sentence. The second man spoke smoothly. His breathing remained steady. There was no fear, no hesitation, no emotion. Daniel asked him several detailed questions about the original conversation. The answers were vague, sometimes contradictory. When asked about the transmission failure, the man laughed. Probably just bad timing. Bad timing? Engineers across 3 different broadcast centers disagreed. Months later, one technician quietly admitted something unusual. During the outage, monitoring equipment detected an extremely powerful burst of radio energy. Not lightning, not solar interference. Something focused, something intentional. The signal lasted less than 2 seconds, long enough to completely overwhelm the satellite uplink. Then, it vanished. No source was ever identified. No government agency claimed responsibility. No official report was released. The incident slowly transformed into legend. Late-night listeners replayed the recording hundreds of times. Audio experts analyzed every second. Some believed strange background voices could be heard beneath the static. Others claimed hidden messages appeared after slowing the recording. Most found nothing. But everyone agreed on one thing. The fear in the first caller's voice sounded genuine. Years passed. Daniel continued hosting his radio show, but he never forgot that night. Whenever guests asked about his most disturbing experience, he always gave the same answer. It wasn't what the caller said. It was what happened immediately after. Because people can fake stories, they can fake tears, they can fake panic. But interrupting a nationwide satellite broadcast, that requires resources almost nobody possesses. Someone, somewhere, had the ability to silence millions of radios at exactly the right moment. And maybe that was the most frightening part of the entire story. Because if someone could erase one conversation that easily, how many others had disappeared without anyone ever noticing? Daniel never received another call from that man. At least, not one that reached the air. Story 2. Final chapter. For nearly 3 years, the lonely telephone stood untouched beneath the desert sun. Thousands of people made the journey. Some came searching for adventure. Some wanted proof that the strange stories were true. Others arrived carrying questions they hoped no ordinary person could answer. Then, without warning, everything ended. On August 14, 2002, a utility maintenance crew arrived before sunrise. By noon, the phone booth was gone. The glass had been removed. The metal frame was cut apart. The concrete foundation was broken into pieces and hauled away. Even the underground cable was excavated. The company released a short public statement. The booth had become a safety hazard. Too many visitors. Too much environmental damage. Case closed. But almost nobody believed that explanation. Witnesses claimed they saw several unmarked black SUVs parked nearby while the work was being carried out. The workers never spoke to anyone. They finished the demolition in only a few hours and disappeared. No press conference, no interviews, nothing. The phone number was permanently disconnected. If you dialed it, all you heard was an automated message saying the number no longer existed. For most people, that should have been the end of the story. Instead, the legend only grew. Visitors continued driving into the empty desert. The booth was gone. Only a patch of cracked concrete remained. Yet strange reports continued. Some claimed they could still hear a faint telephone ringing carried by the wind. Others said their cell phones briefly displayed an incoming call from an unknown number, before instantly losing signal. A group of hikers even reported hearing a telephone ring beneath the ground. At first, they assumed someone had buried an old device. They searched for hours. They found nothing. Then there was the story of Michael Reeves, an amateur radio operator. In 2014, while scanning abandoned frequencies late at night, he heard a weak transmission. Heavy static filled the speaker. Then a man's voice quietly said, "Can anyone hear me?" Michael answered. No response. He repeated himself. Again, only static. Just as he reached to turn off the radio, the voice returned. "You finally answered." Michael froze. "I've been waiting." The transmission lasted less than 15 seconds. Engineers later examined the recording. They confirmed someone had transmitted on the frequency, but they couldn't identify the source. No licensed station had been operating there. No nearby equipment matched the signal. To this day, nobody knows who spoke, or where the transmission came from. Today, almost nothing remains of the forgotten phone booth. The desert has reclaimed nearly everything. The wind erased tire tracks years ago. The concrete has cracked. The surrounding brush has grown back. If you visit the location now, you'll find only silence. But locals still avoid the area after sunset, not because they believe in ghosts, because too many people have returned with stories that sound disturbingly similar. Stories about ringing phones, voices that already know their names, and conversations that seem impossible. Maybe it was all coincidence. Maybe loneliness simply makes people hear what they desperately want to hear. Or maybe some places become connected to something we don't yet understand. A place where strangers weren't always speaking to strangers. A place where every unanswered question eventually found someone willing to listen. So if you ever find yourself alone on a deserted road, and you hear a telephone ringing where no telephone should exist, think carefully before you answer, because once a conversation begins, you may not be speaking to the person who made the call,